Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. No, William, I'm sorry, but I can't this time. The voice on the phone became quieter. I heard a note of ill-concealed irritation. I've already given you all my stash, and our common stash with my wife, I will not gut. You know how Maria is. Thunder, Grandma. Yeah, I know. Alex, I know. Don't sweat it. I don't have to worry about it. William, you borrow money all the time, and you don't pay it back. I didn't want to pick up the phone. Then I was hoping you'd call to pay me back. But no, you're just begging again. Alex, what are you doing? Did you get a reed under your tail or what? Or did you and Maria have another fight? Don't take it out on me. What's Maria got to do with it? Did she borrow $1,000 from me and not pay me back? What's the matter with you, William? He was a nice guy, working. Where the hell are you going? The cell phone was screaming so loud, William had to move it away from his ear. Alex had never raised his voice before. Apparently, it was time to end the conversation. Okay, Alex, didn't mean to interrupt. It's time for me to be happy. Stop, shouted Alex. Tell me, when are you gonna pay me back? Maria's birthday's coming up. She's waiting for a present. What am I gonna tell her? Ugh, why am I making excuses? It's my money. Not even my wife had access to it, but I lent it to you. What's the result? William sighed heavily. If I had the money, I wouldn't have asked you to lend it to me. But you know what kind of situation I'm in. My friends are not answering the phone. You're the only one left, although you don't want to communicate anymore, as far as I'm concerned. I'm being harassed and threatened by debt collectors. Well, it's your own fault. William, I'm sorry, of course, but he sowed the problem with his own hands and now reaps the rewards. You wanted easy money, wanted a nice life, and nothing is ever easy in this world. The voice on the phone softened, and William was able to hold the phone close to his ear again. Well, what does Betty know? You what? William was frightened. If he finds out, they'll kick me out of the apartment. I'm already in there on birds' rights. I live at their place with my grandmother. We never signed. Alex asked, what about it? William waved his hand to emphasize his unenviable position, although the interlocutor could not see the gesture. At that time, he thought that it was not the time. But now it was not the time. It was better to stay alive here. From the tube came a sympathetic message. How much did William owe? Maybe it's not so bad. Maybe Peter should take a bow. Oh, Alex, I owe $10,000. And Peter told me to fuck off with the words and expressions of the people. Wow. Brother, you're really something. How'd you do that? Just like that. Get a job. You gotta do something. I tried to tell you. Alex, what job? I don't even have a passport anymore. They took it away. I'm in their hands now. Listen, friend, tell it all to Betty, just like that. She's a good girl. She'll forgive you and help you. Alex's voice sounded more and more sympathetic. And that's all Betty makes $500 on her cash register. And Grandma's got a pension. She spends it all on her medicine. The utilities, food. I don't contribute anything. I'm sitting on their shoulders. They don't kick me out. Thanks for that. Bitter, William grunted. Well, you know, retirees always have a stash. There's a 90-year-old pensioner in the news who got swindled out of $5 million. Alex, you're telling me to rob grannies? Sad, chuckled William. Anything to that effect. I would never put you up to it. But you could just ask. I bet your grandmother's got something under her mattress, too. All right. Alex, thank you. You're a good guy. You didn't. Thanks for that. You should quit it, William. Live like a normal person, and you'll be happy. Goodbye, said Alex, and shut up. Out of sympathy for his friend, not daring to hang up first, William did not say goodbye. He silently slammed his thumb on the smashed smartphone screen. The call dropped. The last hope was for Alex. What to do next? It was unclear. Maybe really apologize to Betty. No, she wouldn't understand. She wouldn't forgive. The young man kicked the glimpses lying on the road in despair, a gray pebble howling in the sunlight. That flew aside with a thud from the ricochet, off the curb, and rolled indifferently toward the enemy. Along the way, he bumped into his fellows a few times and jumped dashingly over them, dived into a pothole littered with branches. "Gone," muttered William, referring either to the rock or to himself. That one didn't feel like her back was leaking and her tailbone was starting to hurt. There were no customers, so she got up a stiff chair and began to get her workplace in order to stretch a little. Squatting down, she began to wipe the dust off the desk with a rag. "Betty, where did you go?" Ringing voice. Lola the cashier sounded so unexpectedly that Betty flinched. "There you are, aren't you?" Lola rejoiced and laughed. "You now look like a kangaroo who cleans his bag before laughing." She was suddenly caught off guard. Well, funny, all excluded. She got in there. She barely asked, like a machine gun. Betty didn't like talking to her for long. She was a loud girl. She gave me a headache, kept me up all shift. It's nice to have a whole day of visitors on the weekends and not have time to chat. But on Monday, being in a half-empty store, Lola is bored, and she's constantly pestering Betty with trivia questions. She's also annoying with her silly jokes. "I'm not sure how I feel about the kangaroo comparison," said Betty as she got up from the cards. "Well, actually, I'm dusting." "Oh, you're a clever girl." Lola grinned. "Not like me. Not until they give me a magic kick in the pants. They don't take me for a cleaner." Flatterer. So now he's going to ask for money, Betty thought. They lent Betty $10. Oh well, that's what I thought. Betty sighed to herself. Out loud, she said, "What do you need $10 for?" "Oh, there's this lipstick on sale at the cosmetics store. It used to be $15, but now it's $10. They say, you know, how you save you earn. So you could say that I'm going to invest to get both beauty and $5 on top." Started to explain Lola, not counting on the understanding of her pragmatic colleagues. "No, Lola, you're not going to make $5. You're going to spend $10. That's what these promotions are designed to do, like you don't know. And anyway, why don't you buy lipstick in 4 days when you get paid? And you don't have to borrow from anybody. Don't you get it?" Lola pouted. "The promotion will be over by then." "That's good." Betty shrugged. "Wait 4 days and don't buy lipstick. That way, you'll save money." "Oh no, you'll make $15. Wouldn't that be nice? Besides, you've got plenty of makeup. You don't even have time to use it. What else have you got to do? You're such a pain in the ass, Betty. It's like you're not 23 but 73. Of course, you wouldn't understand. If I had lips like yours, I wouldn't have painted them like you. And your hair is gorgeous, and your figure. You've got the customers looking at you. Men line up especially for your cash register. And you're not wearing makeup, but with makeup on. The queen. What am I? A mouse. Makeup is my only salvation." Or sobs. The tip of his nose turned red, and there were real tears in the corner of his eyes. "I think you're exaggerating." I shook my head. "Betty, and there's nothing special about you, and you're so well-groomed and bright. All eyes are on you. I walk home every day, and some people get rides in nice cars. Can't they buy lipstick?" "Yes, they do." Lola answered defiantly. "And you're not jealous. In general, quietly do not give me. Girlfriend, I'm sorry, but I won't. You have to live to see my paycheck. And you know that I work alone in the family. My husband can't find a job yet." Husband's lips curled. "Lola, your roommate, not your husband." With disdain she threw, "Well, my lodger is my lodger." "As you please, although you did not ask for advice. But I still recommend that you do not go beyond the credit budget. You've racked up debts at work. And why are you living with your parents? The salary in this town is pretty decent. You can do without debts. What a shower, Mila Betty. Somebody open a window. I can't breathe." A normal girl can't live on these pennies, and you want to dress well and have fun. But not everyone is interested all day washing dishes and old conversations with grandma. And to use a phone like yours is a shame. If I were you, I wouldn't bother with it in public. What if it rings? I'd pretend it wasn't me. Lola, you're a funny one. Betty, the phone is not as cool as yours, but all the necessary functions performs memory and enough. Yes, and looks nice. And notice, it wasn't bought on credit. I'm not the kind of person who asserts himself at the expense of things, Lola. It's about time. No, you're funny. You can't even get a manicure and still think you're the wisest. That's ridiculous. Meanwhile, youth passes and you'll live your family life until retirement. You don't know how to dream. That's your problem. Betty threw Lola a reproachful look. I can dream, Lola. It's just that you and I have different values. And I'm totally against debt. You can only take it if it's a matter of life and death. In other situations, you have to put up with it, Betty retorted. Offended Lola borrowed money from Pasha's security guard, who was unrequitedly in love with the bright girl, and did buy herself a lipstick. But 4 days later, she was sorely disappointed. After all, the store decided not only to extend the action, but to reduce the price by another 15%. And Betty, having finished her shift, bought groceries and went home. In her mind, she went back to the argument of effort. No, of course, she would also like to use expensive shampoos, perfumes of all kinds, and in cosmetics to have variety, not just one lipstick for 2 years. But so far, the girl understood. That's not the situation right now. She needs to get back on her feet. Then there would be makeup and nice clothes. But in fact, Betty was not at all about material things. The young cashier dreamed of having a child. She looked with longing and tenderness at the little ones. She longed for one of her own. Are you crazy? There is no money. And early on, we cut through the sharp words of William, when Betty only shut up, and the baby, she did not bring up the subject again. But grandmother complained. How could it be? Why did he start a family then, if he doesn't want a baby? Come on, baby, Grandma Wendy reassured her granddaughter with her wrinkled fingers. She stroked Betty's hair, just like when she was a child. Men are later for this business than women mature. But you take your time too, or it'll be like your mother and father. Where's that villain wandering? We haven't seen a penny of child support from him, and you won't be able to claim anything at all. William hasn't married you yet. And what if he did? You should think it over 100 times, shouldn't you? I don't like this cohabitation of yours. It's a good thing I don't go out in the yard, or else I'd be in trouble. The neighbors come flying. Betty, such a good girl. What's wrong with Grandma not respecting herself? But this is the 21st century, Betty objected. Lots of people live like this. Even if it's the 25th William, a husband and wife should have a legal relationship, not like this. Figaro here, Figaro there. Today you have your William, tomorrow you're dead, and you with a baby in your arms. What will you do? I'm old. I'm useless. I can barely walk, and I'm about to follow my grandfather. Oh, Grandma, what are you talking about? She wrinkled her forehead. Betty, you're not going to leave me here alone. The trouble is, I'll be dying to think that I'm leaving my little girl alone. There's no hope for your William. Remember your grandfather. Everything to the family. The man worked hard, he cared. And this slacker, I won't get a job as a loader. I won't go to break my back. I don't want to work as a guard. He's not fit to be a construction worker. He is looking for himself, Granny. Work should bring pleasure, Betty smiled. You're right. Does your work bring you joy? The old woman asked. Well, of course it does, Betty exclaimed, and hugged her beloved grandmother even tighter. Do you know how interesting it is here sometimes? Yes, I can imagine a herring, a customer, or a loaf. So much for variety. So much for interest. You're a talented girl, aren't you? You're drawing pictures, aren't you? All thanks to you, Grandma. Remember how my mother was against me going to art school? She said I couldn't earn a penny. and you took my side with gratitude." Betty remembered. "I'm beginning to think the late Molly was right." The old woman exclaimed, "If you had had a proper education, would you have got a job in a bank or a manager? What's all this trouble?" "But no kin and no self." Betty smiled. "It's just that in my town there's no work for me. And the world is full of opportunities for artists. Yeah, you should go to the big city. But it's my fault. I got you," Grandma sighed. "Don't say that. There's something for me here too." She tried to reassure her granddaughter. "I'm afraid for you, granddaughter." The grandmother continued, "I'm sorry I can't be there for you. You see, Molly, it took an entire apartment for the treatment. And still we couldn't save you. And we spent every penny we had." How she would have watched her health more carefully. If she had gone to the doctors earlier, she would have been saved on the card. "Don't give me a lavish funeral. It is expensive. It's the main thing now, next to Grandpa and Molly. If I die, you'll get an apartment and at least a little money for insurance. I'll feel better, Grandma. Don't talk about sad things." Betty exclaimed, "Let's go and have some tea. The marshmallows are delicious. It's a new brand in our store, and everyone's praising it." How badly Betty brewed. And sad thoughts visited her more and more often. Her grandmother had a heart condition and was suffering from hypertension. Doctors prescribed pills, but they generally shook their hands. What you want old age? Betty herself was a late child. Her mother gave birth to her, as evil tongues used to say out of desperation, when she herself was in her late 40s. They say late children, early orphans. Unfortunately, in Betty's case, this unkind saying came true. Her mother was diagnosed with cancer. We had to sell the apartment, though Molly was very reluctant to do so. She said, "What for? I couldn't be saved. At least Betty would have an apartment." But Betty begged her mother on her knees to do anything to save her life. At first, they wanted to sell grandmother's apartment, but it was much less expensive than the one Molly and her daughter lived in. And we needed a lot of money. So we all had to squat in grandmother's little apartment in an old 2-story house with wooden ceilings and an ever-flowing roof. The apartment was cramped, especially when William came to live with them. Grandma was against them living together before marriage. But Betty said that if William had no place to live, he would go to work in another city, and then she would lose the man she loved. And her grandmother seated her beloved granddaughter, who hardly ever asked for anything. The boy had no corner of his own, and he did not want to live in his parents' house. Tired of his many brothers and sisters, building a family life with Betty, he liked to always have food on the table. Sometimes a caring girl, she even bought him new clothes, even though she was 5 years younger. But she clearly had better financial literacy, and she wasn't afraid of work. She was a janitor and went to the office. William laughed at her. One day her grandmother used the old word black, not in reference to Betty, no. But he liked it so much that when he met Betty from work, he liked to say black with tenderness in his voice. "You, my Betty, didn't you overdo William?" She had no college education, unlike her fiancé, who graduated in engineering. What exactly was his major? The girl didn't know. William replied that she wouldn't understand anything and wouldn't bother explaining anyway, except that it was a pity. There was no job for him in town. When they met, he was working for that not bad money, but soon the work ceased to suit him. By the way, is that where they met? No, Betty didn't have her car repaired. Where'd she get it? The girl worked at a car wash. The job was inside drinking, and the customers were sometimes boorish. In front of one such, William stood up for Betty, which she was very pleased with. The client was unhappy, vocal, making complaints, and Betty did not know what to say. William blocked the girl and took the blow of the accusation upon himself. The situation was saved by Peter, the director. After assessing Betty's work, he realized that the girl had done it brilliantly. The client was simply scandalous. Peter resolved the conflict himself and sent Betty to the bar, which was in their territory, and offered to order a large jar of ice cream at his expense. As moral compensation, while Betty was having her ice cream, William came up to her and struck up a conversation. The girl thanked him for sticking up for her, and the boy realized that his chances of a date were very good. After all, Betty had liked him from day one. Their relationship quickly grew into a strong affection and even love, at least on Betty's part. So when William announced that he was going to move to another city because there was nowhere for him to live here, and from the job that helped pay for the room, he quit, Betty panicked and was very happy when William reluctantly, after much begging, did not agree to move into her and her grandmother's apartment. Betty was sure the smart guy would find a job quickly, but that didn't happen. But it didn't happen as often as Betty would have liked. Seeing objectively, he didn't even earn enough to support himself. What to say about easing Betty and her grandmother's domestic worries? Betty was very happy when she moved from the car wash to work as a cashier, and at such a salary. At the other stores, the rate was less. This one was just lucky. But William was not happy with the change in his girlfriend's job. The salary at the car wash was much higher, but I wouldn't get so tired. And this chemical and breathe it because it is very harmful. Tried to reassure the guy Betty, but he grudgingly pressed his lips and wrinkled his forehead. Betty, to change jobs for an easier, but with a small salary can and even need, but later, not now. Wait until I'm on my feet when I find a decent job. Insisted on his own. William, my love, but you have not been able to find anything for a month. I cannot continue to waste my health on car washes. Tried to change the young man. Betty, if we have a little one, imagine how bad for him when his mother breathes chemicals. What little one? William flustered. Have you stopped taking your pills? What are you afraid of, Betty? Of course I do. It's just that sooner or later the question will come up. Don't even think about it now. You're young, and so am I. You don't even make enough money for the two of us. What if another freak comes along? I don't mind kids, but not now, William said. But she didn't take him seriously. She didn't know what she was saying. Everybody wants kids, and he does, of course. He's just scared. That's okay. It's only a matter of time before he changes his mind. But Betty didn't go along with her lover's demands and quit the car wash in favor of a less harmful job. Of course, at the cashier's desk, too, she had her challenges. Sitting for hours punching products, unable to go to the bathroom, was at times very difficult. My back hurt and my legs hurt. But the girl got used to everything. She did not cuddle with the thought that William would find a job, and she could relax a little and find a better place, and maybe even a profession. After all, she longed to make a living drawing. So far, she painted only at home in her spare time, so to speak, occasionally allowed herself to buy a canvas and paint to make another surprise for her grandmother. A bright, cheerful painting for her room, just the way she liked it. But William usually grumbled that painting was expensive, and the girl often had to deny herself even this innocent hobby. Gradually, Betty got used to the work of a cashier, though it was hard at first. She worked her shifts faithfully. She never asked to be subbed or take time off. She tried very hard and quickly earned the respect of her superiors. True, this did not translate financially in any way, but still it was nice. But William was like a hole in the ground, constantly wandering in search of work, but came up with nothing. Sometimes, when his favorite girl worked the night shift, he could stay out all night. Betty did not know this, even though Grandma was constantly in the apartment. The old lady was silly. Besides, she went to bed early and genuinely thought that William was sleeping in the next room. Both women had no idea that William was disappearing into an underground gambling establishment. In addition to losing money gambling, which he accessed via his phone, he was literally sleeping in the illegal casino. So he ran up a huge debt, which caused fear, anxiety, and even panic. Often William suppressed these painful feelings with alcohol, and Betty wondered where the money went. Betty preferred not to notice the smell of alcohol. Once she only asked and ended up being rude. "You'd think you smelled like roses after a night out." It wouldn't hurt to find out what you do in the store, or if you're in the store at all. Betty became annoyed. She had never lied to William, and she had never done anything that should have been hidden. So such suspicions on his part were distasteful to her. One day she could not stand it, complained to a longtime friend, asking for advice on how to improve her relationship with William. She rounded her eyes in response, showing complete discouragement, and thoughtfully said, "You know, Betty, if it happened to me at least 10% of what happens to you, I would have long since left this William. I would not tolerate it." Betty didn't like that answer, and she never spoke to her friend again. No one would allow even the tiniest grain of doubt about my vision to be planted in my soul, she thought. Later, Betty returned to this conversation many times and thought that if she had followed her friend's advice, she would have avoided many troubles, and her beloved grandmother would still be alive. And the death of Wendy, Betty's grandmother, reported a neighbor. At work, it is not allowed to use the phone, but Betty was willing to make an exception for her grandmother. She always knew to call her granddaughter only in case of emergency, so she never bothered Betty during work hours. But she could dial her grandmother on her break. The neighbor's call, of course, was missed, and when she dialed on her break to find out what was wrong, neighbor was calling from the hospital. "Ah, you're my poor girl," forbade the elderly neighbor, not even had time to say goodbye. "Honey, I do not understand anything," agitatedly said Betty. "What's the matter?" she asked in the shower, guessing she was about to hear something awful. Grandma Wendy had died. Betty, she didn't make it. Her blood pressure spiked. I was just coming in to get her some cheese. I call her Wendy, but she doesn't answer. I went into the room. She was lying on her side by the bed. "Oh, I'm so scared. I'm so scared," the neighbor screamed. Betty was silent. She did not know what to say, but she could feel the black, leaden grief growing inside her. The grief was growing rapidly, getting heavier and heavier. And Betty could no longer stand on her feet. She collapsed to her knees and began to scream, looking into the void. "Grandmother, sweet grandmother, no, this is a dream. A nightmare, amores. Now everything will disperse, and it will turn out that he just dozed off and at work. Oh, what a dream." But the indifferent reality did not proceed. Betty realized that the last family member had left this world. She never imagined that after her grandmother's death, her own life would go to hell. The first unpleasant surprise awaited Betty when she checked her grandmother's card to order a proper funeral for her. The account had a zero balance. Where could the money have gone? Betty wondered. Only she and Grandma knew the PIN code. Prudent, and Grandma Wendy asked her granddaughter not to discuss the card even with William. Moreover, William had no idea where the card was kept, much less what its number or how much it was. William only knew about the pension card, which was in Betty's purse all the time. After all, with this card, the girl bought medicine for her grandmother and some groceries. Sometimes William wondered how much was on Grandma's pension card, but Betty always answered that it was better to ask her grandmother that question. After all, it was her money. How did she feel that at least some source of income should be kept a secret from her beloved? Grandmother felt something too, which is why she wouldn't let William into her room. "This is my cell. Men aren't allowed in here." As if in jest, but with an iron determination, the old woman said. So it was impossible for Betty to think that William had stolen the card and withdrawn all the money. And how could her lover do such a thing? Nevertheless, the incident made the girl suspicious of everyone around her, even the neighbor who called the ambulance, and even the ambulance itself. Or maybe my grandmother made a mistake, and there was no money there. Betty took the grandmother's documents and went to the bank to find out. They refused to show her the card transactions for a long time. They were clearly in no hurry to help her. She had to make a little argument. Only then she was given a statement of the transaction. It turned out that literally 20 minutes before she died, her grandmother had transferred the entire amount to someone else's account. Betty went to great lengths to find out who owned the account. She tried to get the police involved. They accepted her statement, but they didn't promise any help because there was no corpus delicti. The cardholder transferred the money voluntarily. There were no outgoing or received calls on the grandmother's phone, so it was hardly a fraud. The person, apparently, in his old age decided to hush up the sins and sent the money to the one whom he felt guilty. That was the version put forward by the police. They resented William. They don't want to help them anyway. What the hell? And the grandmother had a lot of money. How much? $4,500. What? Where do old people get that kind of stash? Look, we're empty. What are we going to bury Grandma for? Here they had some money. Some on her salary card, some on Grandma's pension. But even that was not enough to bury the grandmother next to her husband and untimely departed daughter. I had to negotiate with the cemetery administration, and it was not a cheap treat. Betty ended up owing more to her acquaintances. Well, that's okay. They'll somehow survive until payday. At least Grandma got a decent burial, and that's okay. Gradually, the leaden sorrow in my stomach, Betty began to dissolve. Every day she was breathing easier. Grandma was sorely missed, but one gets used to living even without one's nearest and dearest. But barely had Betty had time to recover from the loss, as she had to endure another blow. William turned up, and he told Betty not to wait for him until tomorrow morning. Betty didn't wait for details about exactly what he was going to do, but she is used to the fact that her lover does not like to spread his business. In the morning, the girl made breakfast for William and went to work. During the break, she called him to tell him what was in what pot, but William was unavailable. Strange, thought Betty, but decided not to panic early. But when she came home from work in the evening and found that William was not at home in her shower, panic settled in. What had happened? Where was William? Betty dialed his number again, and again no answer was forthcoming. She felt uncomfortable. Her heart beat faster in her chest. Again and again, she dialed the number. But the caller was out of range. All evening, Betty could not calm down. The number of William's friends she did not have, so to find out if the lover was just out for fun company. Betty could not. But the girl didn't have to. She had a gut feeling something was wrong with her man. What was wrong? She called the hospital, the morgue. There was no one that looked like her William, but at least that made her feel good. So he's alive. Maybe he left her. No, Betty pushed those thoughts away. It's silly to think about it. After all his belongings were still there except his wallet and phone, of course. The man could have run away without everything, but not William. He was tied to his things, at least to his tools, which he bought with his own money. No, he couldn't leave everything and run away. Something must have happened to him. After spending the rest of the evening, Betty tried to go to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. The girl got up for a drink of water, looked out the window, and her anxiety grew in her soul, like a grandmother's similar dough. He dozed off only by 3 in the morning, and at 4:00 a.m., the shroud of restless drama dissipated. Sharp phone call. Betty didn't even realize at first what was going on. "Hello," she mumbled hoarsely into the receiver. "Betty." Sonny shrieked back William's voice in a pitiful voice. "William, my love, where are you? What happened? What took you so long?" Betty jumped up on the bed and turned on the light. "Betty, don't get nervous and listen to me carefully. Understand, these people aren't going to joke around. This is serious business. What's the matter?" Betty whispered, barely audible with excitement in her voice. "Sweetheart, forgive me. I will do anything for you, understand? Whatever you want, I will do." Everyone cried. Crying, "William." Yes, okay, I believe. Explain to me what happened." Betty's nerves were as taut as a string. They were about to burst with a screech. "I owe serious people a lot of money. If I do not pay it back, they will do the worst to me, and then get to you," ominously promised William. "You what? What are you talking about?" Betty was frightened. "Where are you now?" "They won't let me out, Betty, and they won't let me out if you don't meet their conditions of trouble." "William, What? What do you want? I'll do everything. Betty burst into tears in response. How much do you owe? I'll find the money. No, honey, you won't. It's going to take a lot. Sobbing. William, what to do? What to do? Betty was frantic. There's only one thing to do. But I know I can't ask that of you, mumbled her lover. Tell me at once. I'll do anything. All right then. We'll have to sign over Grandma's apartment to them. I know you own it because Grandma made a deed of gift a long time ago. You have to come in tomorrow. That means today at 9:00 a.m. at the notary's office. I'll give you the address. It'll be quick, don't worry. And I'll be home tonight. Just please don't let me down. And no cops. Otherwise I'll be ruined. William's voice became quite pitiful. It even seemed to Betty that he was crying. The realization that her boyfriend was asking her to give her grandmother's apartment to someone else didn't come immediately. But it wasn't the last shock. William continued to pummel Betty. You know, I've been put on the meter, and Grandma's apartment isn't going to cover all my debts. But I know there are still antiques, dishes, jewelry. Bring it all to the man tomorrow. Then we'll be even with them. I hear you loud and clear, said Betty. Not yet, beloved. Or have you got something else? William grumbled. The kidney joked gloomily at Betty. Darling, what are you talking about? Forgive me. Hear me, forgive me. You'll do as I ask you. Really, or else they'll kill me. I'll do anything, Betty said, and hung up. For the first time in her life, she felt angry with William. How could it be? It was not yesterday that this debt was formed. So he hid it. And how did he owe it? Where? Who? Why didn't you tell me before? Maybe it could have been solved. So all this time he was leading a double life. Why can't he live a normal life? Go to work like other people, and on weekends have a quiet rest with his family and have a child. Yes, they don't have much money, but that's as long as the needs of the child will grow, but also the income will increase with the right approach to life. Yes, most people live like that. It's a normal life. Why did he need this adventure? And now she has to help him out. And they're not even married. With the secret out of the way, Betty pulled out her grandmother's antiques, which she had inherited from her grandmother. Everything used to have to be hidden. Her grandmother's mother was from a rich, dispossessed family. Some of the treasures she managed to save. There used to be more. But during the war, we had to choose between treasures and food. So part of it was exchanged. My grandmother treasured what she called her precious rolls of velvet cloth in which she kept her valuables carefully wrapped. She decided to sell them only when her daughter Molly became ill, but she would not allow it. She could buy an apartment. And such treasures in the future, Betty, maybe will help. Of course, there was nothing of great value among the jewelry and silverware, but they could help her in a time of need. But Betty had made a firm promise to herself never, under any circumstances, to part with her grandmother's possessions. She could not have imagined how quickly she would break her vow. After looking over all my grandmother's inheritance for goodbye, Betty burst into tears. But she quickly pulled herself together, wiped away a tear with her hand. She resolutely put the velvet cheesecakes in her backpack. All for him, only for him. She kept repeating, trying to convince herself that she was doing the right thing. Betty arranged with the media that she would go to work in her place. She herself put all the necessary documents in a folder and went to the notary. She was very much afraid she would mix up something after a sleepless night. But no, the lawyer had everything prepared. All that was required was her presence and her signature. Betty expected to see the person to whom she would transfer the apartment, but only the notary was present. It was a woman, tall, formidable, with high on clear and bright winning red hair. She was wearing a blouse and skirt and high-heeled shoes. It's just amazing how all that mass was held together by the thin heels. But even these clothes were not capable of making the lady look feminine. The voice turned out to be coarse, too. But on the whole, the lady behaved good-naturedly and gave Betty a sweet smile. You, Betty, don't worry, she said. I've done all the paperwork. Just put your signature right here. Aha. Good girl. And something else you should have brought." The lady winked slyly. "Yes," said Betty, and handed the papers. The lady unwrapped the velvet and grimaced. "Betty, but it's not worth anything. There is nothing to discuss." At these words, Betty felt both joy and relief. It was as if a bird of hope had fluttered up inside her. She wanted to take away her cherished belongings and reached for the light, but the notary's massive paw closed around her thin arm. "Ah, leave that, Betty. Perhaps this one will do. After all, you have no money. Am I right in assuming that? Well, there you go. From the black sheep, as they say." The woman laughed, giving Betty a hypocritical smile. Betty jerked her hand away. She realized she wasn't getting any more of her grandmother's treasures. Gritting her teeth, she felt the bird of hope die in agony inside her. She should not have shown her weakness by trying not to give herself away. The girl asked a question, "Can I get any guarantees?" "What kind of guarantees?" The lady was surprised, raising one eyebrow. "To guarantee that my fiancé would be released," firmly said Betty. The woman is more serious. After a silence of about 20 seconds, she said, "You want a receipt, don't you? My word is stronger than any receipt. We're all honest people here, unlike your William. He lost at the casino, got into debt, and if only he'd stopped at a small loss. But no, he kept going. You broke your word. You got to pay for everything. William, I'm sorry to hear about your bad luck. I can see you're a good girl, but you're stupid. Don't worry, you'll get better. I was a fool once too. Now go pack your things. Tomorrow the apartment, or rather the hovels, it has to be free. You understand me?" The conversation is over. The woman loudly slammed some weighty folder and carelessly tossed. Betty on the velvet whistles into the table, feeling the annoyance of powerlessness. The girl could barely contain her tears, but her pride would not let her show weakness to her enemy. Without saying goodbye, the girl turned and walked out of the office. She wanted to slam the door loudly, but it didn't work. But the check got in the way. All day Betty frantically packed her things, looked for an apartment to move into, hired a car to move out. It was a pity to leave the furniture, though old to the bums, which it is. Now I do not have to move, and the discharge from the apartment did not have to worry. The notary promised to do everything herself. She had everything covered. They just wanted to kidnap a person and took away his apartment. They made a complete mess of the situation. But for the time being, thoughts of material things occupied her. Betty on her head was the least of her worries. The main thing was that these bandits kept their promise and brought her loved one back safe and sound. Gathering her things somehow distracted Betty from distressing thoughts, such as the fact that William might not be brought back tonight. In fact, that he was no longer alive. It was scary. To hell with the apartment. But it was unbearable to lose the man I loved. The time before the evening dragged on painfully long. Every time a car pulled up outside the house, she flinched and ran to the window. But they were only neighbors. When night fell and William never showed up, Betty cowered in panic. What to do? Who to turn to? Despair began to come out. Betty felt chills, her hands were shaking, and the tears were flowing on their own. But suddenly she heard not the typical squeal of brakes. Then a noise, as if someone was struggling. She slammed the door. A few seconds later, the car started. Betty looked out the window in the light of the lantern. She saw a different figure lying on the ground. "William!" shrieked Betty barefoot. She ran out of the apartment. In 2 leaps, she crossed the stairs and ran out into the yard. She rushed toward William. "William, William, are you alive? Say something," shouted Betty. For the first seconds, she thought the young man was not breathing. Soon, however, he spoke. "Oh, I'm alive. I'm alive. Let's go home." Betty helped her lover up. Leaning on the skinny shoulder of the battered girl, William waddled toward home. He came, moaning, and the sounds made Betty's heart burst. She felt ashamed of her recent thoughts, that she was ashamed to give up her grandmother's valuables. After all, they were just things, nothing compared to a human life, especially if it is a life. Her William. Betty was filled with tenderness for her beloved and pride in herself. She saved him. She was the one who pulled him out of danger, like a movie with a good ending. And now they will be fine for sure. They will live, love each other, and build a strong family. And the apartment? It's no big deal. There's no place like home for a sweetheart. Betty helped William wash the dirt off his body. It was evident that the boy had been badly beaten. Then she fed him silently, without asking too many questions, and sent him to bed. Sleep, my love. Rest. I'll get the rest of my things together. All night long, Betty was busy packing. At 10:00 a.m., she was supposed to have the keys, and Betty herself was obliged to leave the apartment immediately after handing over the keys. The girl, who hadn't slept for 2 nights in a row, was exhausted and not thinking straight. She wanted to end it all as soon as possible and enter a new life, even if it was as a homeless person. But it would be a new path with new possibilities. William didn't help load things into the cart he had started. His whole body ached. Nor would Betty allow it. She managed with the help of neighbors and a driver who agreed to be a loader for a fee. Betty expected that the man who came to get the keys would be ugly. But no, it turned out to be an intelligent-looking man. A stubby little man with glasses, through whose thick glasses she could see the evil eyes. His gaze became even more unpleasant when the man put a friendly smile on his face. "Good day to you, Betty." The stranger addressed her familiarly. "I will not introduce myself. We are seeing each other, most likely, for the last time. At least, it's better for you. Are you here for the keys?" "Here you are," Betty said, and held out the keys in her open palms. "You are very kind." The man blurted out, "But first I should like to have a look at the apartment. I don't suppose you flooded it before you left." Betty, it didn't matter. She took the stranger to examine the apartment. The man grumbled unhappily, saying that it was an old hovel of no value. Betty listened to him grumble, clenching her teeth. It pained her that some scoundrel was talking here with his dirty boots and criticizing the nice apartment with disdain. Finally, the man finished grousing and took the keys, and William and Betty set off for their rented place. Upon seeing the new abode, William was not happy. An empty studio apartment with old diverging windows with no repairs. "Betty, wasn't there anything decent?" With annoyance he muttered. Betty's eyes widened. "William, really? I gave my last money for it. But I haven't got anything decent, and I already owe for grandmother's funeral. When we get back on our feet, we'll have a decent one. And now I'm glad about that too." It wasn't at the train station, thank goodness for that. The apartment was ugly, especially in the evening. The electric lights gave me an unpleasant, unsettling feeling. Also, the stench was the same. The tenants clearly didn't like to clean and smoked a lot right in the room. William didn't stop grumbling at all. He was extremely dissatisfied. But Betty didn't care anymore. She was so tired that she just turned off, fell into a deep sleep without dreams. In the morning, the girl began to arrange the furniture. William tried to help, but his ribs began to hurt, so Betty sent him to rest. "You should have an X-ray," she advised. "You never know if your ribs are broken." "Yes, thank you, Mommy," said William sarcastically. Betty shook her head. Why did she bother? He's a big boy. He doesn't need his legs. After cleaning up the apartment, Betty went to work the night shift. She thought it would be hard at work after all the turmoil she'd been through. But it turned out that her home office is a little piece of her former life, an island of calm and stability. It was as if all the nightmare Betty had had to endure lately had never happened. She thought she would never get used to her new apartment. She had to put in a tremendous amount of effort to get the place in order. For 2 weeks, she was constantly scrubbing and painting. In the end, she was able to make the place a little more homey. But William, who had recovered sharply as soon as Betty had finished the bulk of the work, was still not happy. "No, Betty, we must move out," William reasoned. "It's no business to be here. We deserve better. It's cramped in here. Besides, the roaches next door are making out with us. You know that a man who lives under these conditions and saves on himself will never get a proper job and will never succeed. I don't want any success. William, I just want to live with you. It would be better. The option is I'll change jobs and you'll get a job. We live from paycheck to paycheck as it is. I can't buy myself an extra t-shirt, let alone women's pleasures like cosmetics or a new purse, not to mention manicures. And I always have my hands in full view." Betty almost cried with indignation. She already tries to deny herself everything. And William, who plays with the phone all day, reproaches her. Every day the couple had scandals. Every little thing irritated both of them. Betty cried, and William made no attempt to comfort her. He could afford a beer and something to go with it. He smoked good cigarettes, and Betty denied herself everything, even fruit and sweets. She learned how to cook tasty, hearty meals and dishes out of nothing, just to be good for William. But he took all her efforts for granted. One day when she returned home, Betty realized that all the cash had disappeared. Betty had always set aside money from her advance and from her basic paycheck. Most of that money went toward the apartment. The other was for unexpected expenses, which happened all the time. At first, Betty was stunned. Where had the money gone? Had it evaporated? In her heart, she knew the truth. William had taken the money, but she wouldn't accept it. William came home, late and drunk. In his hands, he held a tattered bouquet of the cheapest flowers. Betty smiled drunkenly at William. "Where's the money?" Betty asked in a cold voice. The smile flew off the drunken William's face. He collapsed on his knees in front of the girl and screamed in a childish voice, "Forgive me, William, forgive me. I'd rather be dead. I don't want to live. I'd rather die than be so hysterical." William took off the flowers so that he could squeeze the juice out of them. Then, tossing aside from the torment, the bouquet began to bang his head on the floor, mumbling, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Betty was frightened. She had never seen him like this. What was going on? The money immediately lost meaning to her. The main thing was to save the man I loved. "William, William," did you yell? Betty didn't sound like herself. "Calm down. What are you doing now?" Betty rushed to the kitchen, quickly poured a glass of water, and brought it to William. "Here, have some water to drink." "You what?" "Nobody's scolding you." "Well, honey, don't scare me, so drink, drink," sobs loudly, and shudders like a little child after a prolonged tantrum. "William, the glass is gone. Let me help you undress. That's it. You and I are going to have tea. I have a tape measure. Why don't you lie down in the crib? And I'll make you some tea. Do you want some?" Where did Betty want to go? William mumbled. "Well, good," smiled Betty, placing the tea and sweets on the stool in front of the sofa, where, with a face full of sorrow and a fresh bump on his forehead, was William. Betty crouched modestly on the edge of the bed. "Here's the liver," the girl smiled. William accepted the treat. Seeing that he was relieved, Betty asked the question, "Tell me what happened anyway. I forgive you everything. We've been through so much together. Tell me, where did you put the money?" If it hadn't been for the hops still fogging in William's head, he would hardly have confessed anything for sure. He would have made up some pretty story. But now he had no desire to compose anything and ingenuously, admittedly lost, just answered William. "Lose how?" Betty was taken aback. "Just like that." William shrugged his shoulders. "I have no words for gambling," whispered a changed-faced Betty. "I thought that recent history had permanently discouraged you from gambling." "William, what were you thinking? This is our last money. We got a rent payment due in the next few days, and we need something to live on." "I don't know, love," William sighed. "It's like a disease, you know." All night Betty couldn't sleep, wondering where she could get the money. She could have taken extra shifts at the cash register. but the staff was fully staffed, and there was no overtime for the cashier. A good idea came up in the morning. We have to go back to 100, or rather to the car wash. Peter, the man, is kind. He can be arranged to work on weekends and in between shifts at the store to go completely to the car wash. Betty didn't want to. He can't physically pull it, but you can work part-time. The money there wasn't bad. Plus, they gave tips. Thinking about it, she went to Peter. He welcomed her with open arms. She worked well. Clients, with rare exceptions, were happy. She asked about her life, but Betty joked that she didn't want to tell them how badly she was doing. Now Betty worked for two, very tired. But the goal was to make as much money as possible. The conflict with William was forgotten. At least he thought so. After all, the delicate Betty didn't remind him of his scruples. William was so shaved that he began to rebuke the girl again that they were living in bedbugs, that the others have lodgings. Yes, and the wives are better. David married a businessman's daughter. Not only did his parents buy them an apartment, but they personally gave him a car. The bride, of course, not so good, but well-groomed. Not like you, blushing with indignation. That's great. That's great. Now I'm not well-groomed either. And tell me, please, when do I have the money to take care of myself? I work 24 hours a day without sleep. I already have bruises under my eyes like a panda. I eat nothing but pasta, while other girls my age go out and enjoy life. Will you stop lying on the couch? Get me a job already. Where can I get a job without an education? William waved his hand. I mean, without an education. I don't get it, Betty. I'm the one with a college degree. You're the one with a college degree. Is that what you mean? I lied to you. I haven't got any education, only school. William shrugged his shoulders indifferently. As only school, Betty was taken aback. And why did you lie? To please me. I wanted to impress you. William replied indifferently. You've boasted so many times about your superiority over me, as if you had a degree and I didn't. That I was uneducated. Hey, you. Betty waved her hand and started to get ready for work. Already on the doorstep, she muttered. I do not care about your diplomas. You can work as a janitor, but not lying on the couch like a zucchini on a bed. You wait, and my patience will break. And what will you do? William grinned. Walk away from you. She threw. Ha ha. William laughed. Somebody does. Have you looked at yourself in the mirror lately? She'll go away. Look at you. Trying not to show that she was hurt by these words, Betty hurriedly left the apartment. Outside, she was already crying. At the car wash, she tried to calm down. Work still pulled herself together and began to wash behind a splash of dirt. Charming bug. It was a very elegant blue car. As she washed it, her spirits lifted. I wonder what kind of hostess she has, Betty thought. She was very surprised when a pumped-up, tall young man came to pick up the car. He was dressed to perfume and smelled pleasantly of some very good perfume. Oh, how new. The young man was glad, though she is new. Only from the salon decided to surprise his mother, but the roads in our village were a bit of a letdown. Thank you for helping me out. Oh, it's beautiful. Mom will be glad. Betty smiled, trying to hide her admiration for the young man. She suddenly felt insanely ashamed of her appearance. My name is Andrew. What is yours? Betty said modestly. Isn't that a beautiful name? Andrew marveled. Betty grinned. Actually, I wanted to ask you why such a beautiful girl is crying. What are you? I'm not crying, it's all soap. Did Betty try to justify herself? No, I could see you were crying. The young man insisted. You know, Andrew, let's make a better car for your mother, so that no one else in the world has it. And Betty blurted out in order to change the subject of the conversation. I wonder, what do you suggest? Andrew was surprised. Let's draw flowers on the hood. The girl suggested. And she blushed at her impudence. Andrew hesitated. Oh, Betty, you know, I live abroad. I'm used to our kitsch. I don't think it will be beautiful. I'm afraid it would be Kolko's, he explained guiltily. What do you say? Look in my phone. These are my works in solo paints. Not on cars, of course, but still. Betty's hands were shaking. She really wanted Andrew to take her job offer. It was even okay. Well, let's give it a try, he agreed. Betty arranged that he would provide her with paint and a place to work. The old-timer, he agreed. Well, don't let me down, Betty. He's a tough guy, that's for sure. I don't want to fight, he asked. And Betty didn't let him down. The flowers on the car looked so pretty that the bug seemed to come to life. Now this car has a soul, Peter admired. Are you a talent, William? We should include this service in the price. I don't think there will be many orders, but I'll be glad to try it, she answered. Andrew was delighted with her work. In his joy, he gave Betty a decent sum of money, much more than she asked. And for the first time in her married life, Betty decided not to tell William about the extra earnings. She decided to keep quiet about the car episode, even though she wanted to show off, to show what beauty her hands could create. But a woman's intuition told her it was better not to. Since then, thanks to advertising, she had fallen off about once. Every 2 weeks, she received an order to do a drawing on a car. The pay wasn't bad. Betty was glad. She saved the money carefully. It would come in handy. She wanted to get another better apartment. Maybe William was right. If they moved, he'd be motivated. Work would go. Finally, despite all their differences, Betty continued to have faith in William. She believed he could change. He was just depressed now from his experiences and constant failures. Every night, Betty counted her income, her car wash, her work at the cash register, and her painting orders. All of this allowed her to finally settle her debts and pay her rent. Now she was faced with the dilemma of continuing to work at the same pace and ruining her health permanently, or stop. Betty cringed at the thought of having to save every penny again. Of course, she wasn't spending too much now, but she already felt much freer. At the same time, she realized that her life was passing her by, and beauty was taking its toll. Even Andrew noticed that she looked tired. He often took his car to the car wash, and everyone included. Peter understood that a clean car at his car washes for a reason. Betty delicately foiled all attempts at courtship on Andrew's part. That didn't stop her from admiring his looks and intelligence. Is it a joke the guy is involved in the development of nanorobots, internships abroad, and is successful in every sense of the word? And what is she? Nevertheless, the girl let Andrew drive her home a couple of times when her shift ended late. She also drank coffee with him, after which she felt dirty of the available, and she promised herself that she wouldn't do it again. She was very ashamed of herself in front of William. But deep down, she knew that her fiancé had a lot to learn from Andrew's courtesy. Although William had also been nice in the early days of their relationship, even sticking up for her at work. The flow of endless thoughts was interrupted by a sudden call. Betty was just having coffee in the back of the supermarket, and the number was unfamiliar. "Hello," said Betty in a puzzled voice. "Hello, Betty," started a confident female voice. "Yes," I answered Betty. "My name is Maria. I'm the wife of Alex's friend William. Maybe you know him." Betty tensed, remembering. "Yes, I think I heard something," she answered with a wrinkle of her forehead. "Now, Betty, don't take this the wrong way, but your William took $1,000 from my husband and still hasn't given it back. I didn't know it myself for a long time. Alex was hiding it. Probably wanted to protect a friend. But now his patience has run out, and he confessed. And why Alex does not resolve this issue with William. Why are you calling me?" Irritated, asked Betty. She was so tired of all this. And he, my dear, is not picking up the phone. "Anyway, I strongly recommend returning the money," Maria said firmly. "And there is a receipt that he took the money." Betty was not confused. "What receipt?" Maria was indignant. Alex gave him money as a friend. He didn't ask for any paperwork. "I'm sorry, Maria, but I don't have any money," Betty said. I've already lost my apartment at 10 jobs, and I don't care about that. Maria said angrily. We didn't get this money for nothing either. Lesha earned it honestly. If you do not return the money, I'll talk to someone. And then you'll have to spend a lot more to cure your William. That's the end of the conversation, barked and Maria, and hung up. How cool is everyone? Mumbled Betty and headed for the sales floor. What's easier with you than metal, or don't you have a face on you? You bet, sighed Betty. There's another debt William's got. I'm like a bug in a can trying to get out. I spend so much effort, and with a snap of my fingers, they send me back to the bottom. See, Betty, that's how the boomerang works. And you only hesitated to give me $10 at the time. You've ruined all my karma, all bad luck. Don't be silly, said the cleaning lady, who had just decided to wave a rag at me. Not many buyers so far. All her troubles were not from karma, but from William Mers. She lived her life without any trouble. But no, she's got a sponger in her pocket. He drank all the juice out of her. You walked out on him. What's keeping you? Betty was silent. She knew the cleaning lady was right, but she couldn't say she was leaving William either. Betty couldn't. In this crazy whirlwind of events, she had completely forgotten to take her pills, and she didn't have intimacy with William very often. She was always away at work. She was tired and not interested. Nevertheless, she was pregnant. William knew. She told him right away. His reaction to the news literally knocked Betty off her feet. Well, wait, it might still snap. It happens in the early term, he said. And if it doesn't, you'll get an abortion. Now it's just like brushing your teeth. William's cruel words made Betty cry, and it provoked even more irritation from the father-to-be. See, what kind of psychologist are you? What are you doing with a baby? But Betty decided she was going to have the baby. Of course, it will be very difficult, but she won't have an abortion for anything. Every day William did not little her about the abortion and brought Betty to tears. The girl believed that when he saw the baby, his heart would melt and everything would change. Yes, one could walk away. But is it right to leave a child without a father? Just because she can't connect with him? To be a single mother not being able to give her child a normal upbringing? Is that what her baby deserves? No, Betty will do anything to make sure her child has a fulfilling family. It's her responsibility that she chose such a daddy for him, isn't it? So she must correct her own mistakes. When Betty returned from work, she relayed the conversation with Maria to William. She had not expected him to be so impressed by his friend's wife's threats. He turned pale with green sweat and sank heavily onto the couch. Betty groaned. What to do? Beloved? Yes, my fault. I took a debt. But that was a long time ago, when the bandits were upon me. You know, Betty, they threatened to do something to you, and I couldn't let you suffer. That's why I didn't talk. I tried to give the money away on my own by borrowing from friends, and friends, is that what they turned out to be? Betty felt sorry for William. Indeed, what a state he was in then, in perpetual fear of being caught and maimed, if not killed by his beloved. Tell me how much and to whom else you owe. Let's close all the debts with you, finally, and enter into a new life without this burden. I want the father of my child to have an honest name. They sat down together at the table, took a piece of paper and a pencil to do the math. It turned out that William had $3,000 in debt. Where did these come from? Tiredly asked Betty. And it was I took a microcredit, guiltily. William answered. Oh, it would be better if these bandits did not give you a passport. Betty sighed. I'm asking you to promise me that no more debts. Understand, I won't be able to work maternity soon, and the allowance won't cover your appetites. I understand, darling, I understand, mumbled William, and hugged Betty tightly. You know what, honey? Betty asked. What's that? William exclaimed cheerfully and reached for the bread. Taking out a bag of uncut Borodinos, he took off a flexible yellow and put it on his ring finger. Betty, darling, tell me, will you marry me? In a trembling voice, asked William. looking faithfully into her eyes. Out of surprise, Betty cried. How long had she waited for this? She had always known that her sacrifices were not in vain. William was just waiting for her support, and all she did was rebuke and nag him. So we sat down, had a nice talk, outlined, so to speak, the path of further development of relations. Now I feel calmer. Yes, of course I will. You're still asking? Betty smiled through her tears. She suddenly had a second wind. Her months of fatigue were gone. You know, I think we can pay off our debts faster. If we sold something, Betty said. What are we gonna sell? Sighed William. We have nothing left. But why is there a penny to be found? It's easier to make a penny. The main thing is to at least make some contributions. That's okay. We'll manage. And you know, I'd like to celebrate tonight with champagne. Here's the money, please. Are you allowed, Betty? William asked, thoughtfully. Betty smiled. William left, and the girl pulled out her nightstand, Grandma's mobile phone. She had once given her a simple smartphone, so she could use it easily and always be more in touch. You could have bought both a push button and a phone, but Betty didn't want to save money on her beloved grandmother. As a result, Grandma hardly ever used the phone. And after she died, Betty wanted to keep the cell phone as a keepsake, and they wouldn't give much money for it. After thinking for a while, Betty put the phone on charge, then turned it on. Waiting a second, she opened the folder with the texts. Her grandmother texted mostly just Betty. Rereading the correspondence, the girl smiled, but tears glistened in the corners of her eyes. Ah, how Grandma Wendy is missed. To sell the phone, you have to reset to factory settings, destroy all the files. Pathetic. Although my grandmother's phone had almost nothing. But just in case she missed something, Betty began to open folders in order to download the necessary files in case of emergency. Suddenly, she found a strange folder with audio files. Probably music for the phone, she thought. Betty pressed the player button and her heart sank down. From the speaker came her grandmother's native voice. Hello, Betty. What took you so long? Is the shift over already? Oh, Grandma, we got held up. I'll be there soon. Don't worry, answered her Betty's voice. It turned out that Grandma's conversations were recorded in the phone memory. I must have pressed something by accident and turned on the function. Wow, Betty was laughing and crying. The recordings went from early to late, so she decided to listen to the latest conversations, and what she heard shocked her. Hello, came the soft voice of her grandmother. Hello, it was William. The voice was a frightened gasp. What is it, William? Grandmother asked. Oh, trouble would have come over flying. What? Hurry up and tell me. You could hear how excited the old lady was. With Betty, trouble with her car hit. At the hospital, she told William. How, Betty dear, my grandmother burst into tears. Where is she? What's wrong with her? Don't call her. She's in serious condition. The emergency room won't answer anyway. And the phone may be broken, but you can save her in a flight. But you cannot lose time. She needs the money. Maybe you have some kind of stash. Is there a matter of life and death? There is, of course, on the card. And how do I pass it on? Granny fussed. You could hear her breathing heavily. It's a matter of 5 minutes, William answered. I'll do it myself. I just need some information. Now, you and I will go straight to the doctor on the card and translate. Then follow the instructions on how to transfer the money to the card. The grandmother was worried. She didn't understand something, but in the end, she transferred all the money. I'm going to the hospital, William said. As soon as I have news, I'll let you know right away. The recording was over, and Betty sat like a changeling, holding the phone in her hands. It all makes sense now. Grandma got sick from the news that Betty had been hit by a car. But how could William do that to her? Honey, here I am with the champagne. William's cheerful voice came from the hallway. Betty did not react. Upon entering the room, William saw the girl with the phone in her hand. She wasn't wearing a face, not saying a word. She turned on the audio recording. Hearing her voice, William turned pale. His face stretched a feature. "Shit!" He screamed and threw the champagne bottle against the wall in fright and surprise. Betty jumped up, but the rage gave way to fear. "You're the one to blame for my grandmother's death for the money. Who drove a man to his grave?" shouted Betty. "Fool!" William roared. "I rescued you. They threatened to kill you. Followed you. And if I hadn't given that money, you would have had a real accident in the next few days. Only you wouldn't have survived. Or would you want to be taken out on a cover and tortured like me? I wish you'd just be normal. You know, normal." Betty burst into tears. "You're down in the swamp yourself, and you're dragging me along with you. I went 24 hours, and I still can't get out of this quagmire. It's your own fault. If you'd had a proper education, you'd have had a lucrative job. And now you don't know how to do a damn thing. You'll be sitting on a cash register till you retire." Betty clenched her teeth. An unpleasant chill ran somewhere in the solar plexus. "I'm going for an abortion tomorrow. I don't want to have a baby with a man as deceitful and hypocritical as you, and I beg you very much to leave my apartment." She said firmly that your apartment is not your apartment, but a rented one. "I'm as much a tenant as you are, so don't blame me, but I'm going to stay here. And if you don't like it, why is the door so open?" Betty was taken aback by the insolence. She didn't know what to say. Abruptly, she took the gold band from her finger and tossed the improvised ring on the floor. "We're breaking up," William announced emphatically. All she did was laugh back. "Really? Yeah. Someone needs a Crimea for the old in the sense of the old. I'm only 24. Outraged Betty. "So, you don't look 50. You're not well-groomed, It's a shame to go out in public with you." Betty burst into tears. She knew perfectly well that if she had enough money to take care of herself and not such a hard job with a perpetual shortage, she would look wonderful, better than most. Why did she sacrifice herself? Why was she torturing herself? Betty manifested throughout the night. William, who had been sent to sleep in the kitchen, periodically knocked on the wall and demanded that she stop howling like a Baskerville dog. But Betty could not calm down. The next day, she didn't feel well. She decided to stay home. "Well, going to the abortion today?" William asked this morning. "Yes," dryly answered Betty. "That's good. Ooh, my head hurts. Kept me up all night in my own way. Make me a coffee and a sandwich." William threw in some carelessly, as if nothing had happened. "You'll have sandwiches in a minute," Betty thought. William went out, and she rummaged through the medicine cabinet for laxative drops. They were a little sweet, and so when the girl added them to her coffee, it only made it taste better. Prepare her lover's breakfast with a horse dose of laxative. Betty called her ex-fiancé to breakfast. "Oh, hot sandwiches, coffee, yogurt." "Well done, Betty," William rejoiced. "You're welcome," said Betty sneeringly, and walked out of the kitchen. She didn't think the effects of the laxative would come so quickly, but very soon her lover folded in half and rushed like a jet torpedo toward the bathroom. The door slammed. There was a screech of profanity coming from the bathroom. Betty grinned maliciously. She hadn't expected such an act from herself, but now she realized she hated the man. He had almost destroyed her as a human being, and he was the one who had brought her grandmother to her grave. Suddenly, Betty heard the sound of a text message. It wasn't her phone, but William's. Normally, when he went to the bathroom, he always took it with him and generally tried to keep the screen down. But Betty wouldn't pick up someone else's phone anyway. That wasn't how she was brought up. But this time it was different. It wasn't hard for her to unlock the phone and open her correspondence. Her William was communicating with the woman of his messages. Everything. She said she would abort so I was free. I wouldn't have recognized the baby anyway. Unsure she'd have walked out on him. And she wants to pin it on me like a sucker. Message from a stranger. 100% she does. We know the type. When she's going to the hospital tomorrow, William replied. We won't have him tomorrow either. How about my place then? I'll be great. These were yesterday's texts, and here's what the impatient stranger wrote. Just what? Well, is yours gone? Come over. Betty was seized with anger. After thinking for a few seconds, Betty wrote back, mine's gone, but I can't come. I have diarrhea. A new text message rattled off, but she wouldn't read it. Not interesting and disgusting to read the correspondence of an ex with a mistress. Getting dressed, Betty slammed the door and headed outside. She was not going to have an abortion. She said so out of anger. It wasn't the baby's fault that he had such a father. But the girl came up with a revenge plan. She dialed Andrew's number and explained the situation. She said she needed to move out immediately. She had the money. She just needed a helper. She needed a car for the move and to arrange for a place to live. All right, Betty, I'll help you hire movers. The afternoon would be fine. I'm glad Andrew asked. It will be all right. Betty approved. She herself went to the beauty parlor. Can I have everything at once? She asked the receptionist. What do you need? The receptionist was surprised. Manicure, pedicure, makeup, hair. Betty shrugged. I take it that's the evening look. Yes, we're catering to you right now. The makeover took more than an hour, but when it was over, Betty didn't recognize herself in the mirror. The masters were thrilled too. Here is this beauty, big eyes, puffy lips, natural long hair with working windows that do not match the shoulders. Girl, you should walk down the runway, smiled one of the fabric masters, and liked herself. Except that these old rags need to be changed into something more decent. And the girl went to the store to buy herself something that would bring her joy, not a practical outfit to wear for 20 years. And she found this outfit, a blue dress on thin bri short. I'll start with the ear, her grandmother would say. But for a dance, on a perfect figure, it looked unparalleled. I'll take it, Betty decided. Soon, when else will I be able to wear it? She took her purse and sandals under the dress and proudly went home. She was pleased that people were looking at her, both men and women. She even received a few compliments along the way. It had been a long time since she had heard anything nice in her address. True, her makeup was bright for daytime, but that didn't bother Betty. She felt like a queen, arranged to meet Andrew downtown. He was delighted with her appearance and didn't even recognize her at first. You are beautiful. Betty has always been beautiful, but today especially, Andrew said enthusiastically. And today is her special day. Starting a new life, Betty said. Together, they drove to Betty's house, and after waiting in the yard for the movers, they all went up to the floor together. The girl was sure that William had gone to his mistress, but he was lying on the sofa, haggard with a face the color of a pale toadstool. The movers unceremoniously entered the room where the sufferer lay, took the chair and the television, and carried him away. William was taken aback. He did not understand what was happening. Betty entered the room. William, like Andrew earlier, did not recognize her at first. You were surprised. He did not recognize. Rich will be indifferent, she said, and turned to Andrew. Will you help me to pack? Yes, I will. The boy agreed. What is going on? William shouted. Who the hell is that? He's my friend, calmly explained Betty. Ah, friend, I see. I always knew you were a slut. William spat contemptuously. A second later, William was flying down, and with a mighty punch, Andrew charged him with his fist in the carryover. The defeated William bored miserably and crawled to the side. Don't you dare hurt this beautiful girl, sternly said Andrew. She has found herself a protector. William said sarcastically, clutching his nose, but well done. And I thought it wasn't me who knocked her up, it was him. Wanted to hang someone else's baby on me. Didn't come out, yeah. Clasping the transfer with 2 fingers, he went to the bathroom. Andrew looked at Betty questioningly. The girl made it clear that she would discuss it with him later. William came back, tried to cause a scandal again, threatened to call the police, but it had no effect. So he just ran from Betty to Andrew, from Andrew to the movers, threatening that if, God forbid, they tried to steal his personal belongings, He would have the whole town in an uproar. Finally, the stuff was loaded. The truck started moving. Oh, where are they going? Let's go, Betty wondered. William, I have several options for a comfortable apartment for you, but you have to see for yourself, because you live there. So in the meantime, let your furniture stay in storage for a couple of days. And when you choose an apartment, then you'll get everything brought to you. Do you want us to buy you a new one? No, Andrew, it's not necessary. I'm not comfortable. And as for apartments, I need something on a budget that I can pay for. I have savings, but they're pretty modest. Don't worry about that. Betty, I'll add as much as you need. You have to live in decent conditions, Andrew said. Now let's go to my hotel room. I have settled there soon to go abroad again, so I do not rent an apartment. And I don't want to live with my mother. Tired of advice. Constantly says when you get married, when the grandchildren. Betty was uncomfortable. She really didn't want to go to the hotel with Andrew, but she couldn't refuse. After all, he had helped her so much with dinner at the restaurant. They went up to the room. All evening they chatted, and towards nightfall, Andrew let her know that he would like to continue, but Betty delicately refused. I'm sorry, Andrew. I didn't think we were going to get on like this. I saw that you liked me, but I didn't realize how much. Andrew, I'm pregnant with William's baby, and I'm going to have it. I'm sorry. Andrew sighed. I don't know what to say. Betty. He spoke thoughtfully. Then don't say anything, replied the girl. Let's go to sleep. We'll sleep in the morning, said the young man. Betty lay down on the bed, and he lay down next to her on the floor. Both were not sleeping well. Betty dozed off, and it wasn't until morning. And when she woke up, she found breakfast in bed and a bouquet of flowers waiting for her. No one had ever arranged such a thing before. Betty, said Andrew, who had obviously already had time to shave and shower. I thought about it and decided to ask you to try a relationship. Yes, it's not my child, but I don't think I would see him as a stranger. Betty, his words upset and frightened her at the same time. She was very afraid that the relationship would bring her pain again. Thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate it. I really do. But you also understand me, please. I lost myself in a past relationship, and I just need to be alone. So no offense, but I'm not ready yet. Andrew was obviously upset by her answer, but he kept his promise, took her to show her the apartment, said that her refusal would not affect his decision to pay her rent. He showed her beautiful, expensive apartments, but Betty, upon learning how much they cost, refused. Andrew promised to pay her rent several months in advance, but the girl flatly refused to accept help. Finally, they arrived at a bright, spacious studio apartment with a view of the lake. Here, they took her breath away. How did she like it? From that window, you could see the sunrise, and it was a beautiful sight. The realtor was trying to entice clients, and that one's the sunset. The apartment has everything you need to see. A wonderful place for a young couple to live. Andrew said confidently. He's making a fuss. Betty is expensive, but Andrew didn't hear him. Is it possible to sign a one-year lease? Yes, of course. The realtor was happy. Andrew paid a year's rent and helped Betty move in the next day. A few days later, he went abroad with Betty. They agreed that if he came back in a year and his intentions remained the same, and if Betty was okay with it, they would try to build a relationship. The girl had little faith in that. Why would he want a woman with a tiny baby in her arms who was not born of him at all? So she decided not to hope for a man, but to live her life. At first, Andrew often called and wrote to Betty, but gradually his interest faded, and she didn't like to impose. All she was thinking about was her future child, and she herself, Betty, resigned from the car wash, which upset Peter a lot. But she was in no hurry to leave the register, although Andrew regularly sent her money, had spied her card number, and was now spoiling her. But Betty knew she had only herself to count on. But when the doctor said that such work was bad for her pregnancy, she still decided to prioritize and quit. For the first time, she had so much free time, and for the first time, Betty could take care of herself, sleep as much as she wanted, eat delicious meals, started going for manicures and masks, and soon the idle life bored her. The girl began to look for something to do. Her soul yearned to paint. So the girl took up her canvas. She painted dawn and sunset, which she saw from her window, and it lifted her spirits. And one day she dreamed that she was going to have a baby girl, whom she would name Nicole. And that little girl lived in a room from Zephyr. Inspired, Betty decided to paint her dream. She tried working in oil and Cyril and marker, and each time, her paintings turned out soulful, exploring joy and kindness. Having put up her work on one of the thematic websites, Betty suddenly received a huge number of responses. She was recommended to sell her work, but even more unexpected was a letter from a children's magazine. They needed an illustrator, and Betty's manner and idea was just right for this format for an expectant mother on maternity leave. It was a real find. The girl was absorbed in her work, and sometimes she even forgot to eat. In order not to break the regime, she had to put herself on a timer to remind herself to eat. Now we're eating, and now we're walking. Feeling Betty, feeling good. Pregnancy went smoothly, and the day of delivery snuck up on me. She gave birth to Betty. To the surprise of the nursing staff, it was easy too. Such a frail little girl, but so strong. They talked about Betty, and her baby girl was born, but exactly as Nicole had named her baby girl in her dream. Betty was so happy that she didn't worry at all about the fact that there was no one to pick her up from the maternity hospital. She called herself a cab. She put the baby in a prearranged car seat and happily drove home. How surprised was the girl when she found her apartment, all left with flowers and balloons. Betty froze on the threshold, not understanding what was happening. Suddenly, the door of the balcony opened, and after pulling back the curtain, Andrew came out. When he saw Betty, he also froze in place. "How are you already here?" "I thought the discharge was an hour late," he said in a confused voice. "Well, it's a celebration, and I'm alone, so I left early without showing off," Betty answered, no less perplexed. "I was going to pick you up. It wasn't much of a surprise." "I'm sorry," Andrew said guiltily. "I wanted to surprise and please." "I don't mind." "Sorry, I had to break into your apartment without permission." "That's all right," smiled Betty. "I'm really surprised and touched, and I don't know what to say." Andrew and Betty didn't immediately dare to hug each other. They were tired of each other. Both felt awkward, but caring for the baby distracted them both, and it broke the ice between them. "I confess, Betty, I was very much afraid to find anyone here. William yours, for instance," said Andrew. "Oh, what's that?" "I haven't heard from him for a long time, and I'm glad of that. I didn't lie to you." "I needed time to think," answered Betty. "Thought Andrew, and you said you'd be gone for a year. Did you come sooner?" Betty interrupted the conversation. "Did something happen?" "Yes," agreed the young man. "Something happened. I want you to sign the baby up for me. We can sign right away, or we can do it later when you want. If you don't agree, just say so, and I'll understand." Betty was fine with it. She was ready to jump for joy. Andrew came back to her. His feeling, hadn't it faded? After all, Betty had mentally buried their relationship, and now he was ready to take responsibility for her and her child. 6 months have passed. Did Betty and Andrew have time to get married? The wedding was quiet, but very beautiful. Andrew's mother insisted on celebrating. At first, she didn't understand her son's choice, but then she accepted it. The main thing was for her son to be happy, and soon she fell in love with Nicole as her own granddaughter and was happy to babysit her, allowing the young people to be alone for once in a while. Betty loved her family life. She couldn't have dreamed of such a caring husband. Betty had little contact with anyone from her past life, and she was very surprised to get a call from Peter. Betty hadn't forgotten the old man. Peter began cheerfully. "I have not forgotten, of course," rejoiced the girl. "How do you do? I have something to do with you, Betty. You painted the cars beautifully. I have a client. I have a job to do. I really need it." Betty: "Oh, come on, Peter. I'm done with that. I draw for children's magazines now, and even that's rare. I've got a baby. You haven't let me down, Betty. Please help me out. He's an old friend of mine, a serious man from the 90s, you know. We used to be in business together. He and I have been through thick and thin. How many times they wanted to take that business away from us. Nothing, we survived. And now he's my buddy, for whom I'm the moon from the sky. Now he wants to paint a car. I told him you were on maternity leave, and he promised me triple the money for the handyman. Betty was embarrassed. She didn't need the money now. But in the dark times, Peter was the one who bailed her out. Can't let you down. I'll be there tomorrow, promised the young mother. With a heavy heart, she left the baby with her mother-in-law and went off to the 100. Betty worked quickly until lunchtime and drove to the baby, then returned the next day, and so for a whole week, the workers that helped. Betty took parts off and put them back on. Finally, the artist finished the job, and the car got an airbrush of extraordinary beauty. Accepting the work, the client, an elderly, imposing man in an expensive suit, was pleased. "Well, Betty, here is your fee," he said, handing Betty an envelope. Without opening it, the girl slipped the bundle into her backpack. "But I would like to thank you somehow," the man continued. "The picture you made. It has a sacred meaning to me, and I am sure it will be a talisman for me. Tell me, what can I do for you?" "Nothing," Betty shrugged. "I have everything." Was glad to help. "Perhaps you'd like to think about it," the man suggested. No, I don't need anything." The girl refused. But as the client was about to leave, she called him Robert. "Oh, take me to the cemetery. It's just outside the city. I want to visit my husband's family. I beg, but he is still busy. And I'm afraid to go alone. But that is, of course, if you have time. Shall we go?" The man shrugged his shoulders. "You should appreciate relatives. And after they leave, we'll buy flowers on the way." Betty did not immediately find the graves of relatives. It was sad to find them so untended. The girl immediately began to tear weeds with her bare hands and apologize aloud to her relatives. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm sorry, Mommy. I'm sorry, Grandpa." She was especially ashamed in front of her grandmother. She never got around to putting up a monument to her. "I will order it this week," the girl thought. Suddenly, Robert's trembling voice was heard from behind her. "Who is that woman? Is it your mother?" he asked. "You are boring, Betty." And rubbing her lower back, she wiped the dust off her mother's picture with a bundle of grass. "Molly," the man whispered. Betty didn't know what was wrong. And Robert slowly walked over to the monument, kissed the picture, and wept softly. The older man was not immediately able to explain to the girl what was the matter. It was Betty's forbidden love. "I was married then. We had just had a son, but we were not happy. My wife was nagging all the time, and then there were business problems, and no one to open up to. And I, Betty, I confess, had a fling with Molly, and I had a stormy affair. But my wife found out, threatened to never see the baby again. I could have pressured her and taken my son away by force, but I didn't want to. The boy was very attached to his mother. I had to choose, and I chose the family. And Molly went to her hometown to be with her mother. I'm not from around here myself. Only moved here in my old age, to be quiet and away from old memories. I was very sorry it happened to Molly. I was not happy with my wife, and then we were separated. I didn't keep her. She left. She got married. It was better for me. But the fact that my son became an addict was a tragedy for me. I treated him. I did everything I could. No, the kid's gone. Buried him young. Robert was quiet. Betty was quiet, too. She didn't know what to say or how to react. What did she die of? Suddenly, Robert asked. Cancer. Quietly, Betty answered. When are we going to get rid of this contagion? The man said angrily. Have you ever been married? No, I haven't even been out with anyone, Betty answered. Robert was silent again. Then he turned to Betty and asked, when were you born? Betty gave the date of her birth. Robert's face stretched and went from round to oval. "What do you mean?" "No, I'm counting right. That is, 7 months after we broke up." Betty didn't immediately understand why this fact evoked such emotion in him. But then it dawned on her, this burly, elderly man with a criminal past. Her father, all the way back. They were silent, and the next day they arranged to meet. Betty showed Robert her granddaughter to make sure she was related. They decided to take a DNA test. Betty wondered if it was really her father. It turned out to be true. Once this was confirmed, Robert surrounded Betty with such care, as if he wanted to make up for all the years he had been absent from her life. Betty told him her story and how her grandmother's apartment had been taken from her, and how her ex had bullied her. "Well, we'll nail this chimera," my father promised, referring to the gang and the lying notary public. Robert pulled up his connections, and soon Betty got the keys to Grandma's apartment, and the husband of such a notary fled the city, tailing the children. "I will not allow my own to be hurt," said Robert authoritatively. Betty found it hard to believe that this quiet old man, who runs an honest business, was once a real tycoon. But now he was different, out with his granddaughter and spoiling her. Sometimes in his nostalgia he reminisces about the past and says, "Yes, if I had known that my children would pay for my sins, I would have led a very different life." And Betty remembered these words firmly. She really hoped that her little Nicole would not have to pay for her father's sins, and she would hate for the girl to ever find out that her real father was not Andrew, but Alphonse William. And then one day Betty accidentally found out that her ex was also a crook. A mutual acquaintance told her, but he didn't know the details. "Yeah, he's 100% in jail. But what exactly is he in for?" "I don't know. Fraud, I think. Tried to swindle some old lady out of her savings." Betty smiled and squeezed her eyes shut. How lucky she was, after all, to have met Andrew, so trustworthy and so beloved. And to him she would surely bear a son, just as he had dreamed.